There you are on a warm Saturday morning, kneeling in the dirt at the edge of the garden with your gloves already stained green, pulling up handful after handful of the same stubborn plants that come back every spring no matter what you do. You shake the soil from their roots and toss them over your shoulder into the wheelbarrow, the dandelions and the broad, flat leaves by the path, and that sticky vine that grabs your sleeve. And by noon, you've got a heap of them wilting in the sun, ready for the burn pile or the bin. It feels like good work, like tidying, like you finally won a little ground back from the wildness that's always pushing in at the fences. And I understand that feeling, I surely do, because I spent my own younger years doing the very same thing before my granny took me by the wrist one afternoon and showed me what I was throwing away. Because here is the quiet truth of it. Half of what most folks yank up and call a weed is the same plant their great grandmother would have carried inside, washed at the kitchen sink, and turned into the very thing she reached for when the family took sick. The bitter green you cursed was once the spring tonic. The leaf you trampled was the one they pressed onto a bee sting. And these days, a single small bottle of the gentle remedies those plants once gave for free can run you 8, 10, $15 at the pharmacy counter, more every year it seems, while the living thing it was copied from grows wild and unwanted, 3 steps from your back door. So before you pull another one, sit with me a while, because the old folks had a plainer way, and it has been waiting in your yard this whole time. So let me tell you plainly what I'm offering, because I don't believe in dressing a thing up bigger than it is. There are 9 ordinary weeds I want to walk you through. Every one of them common enough that you've likely got most of them growing somewhere on your land right now, and every one of them a plant that mountain families and old world grandmothers leaned on for generations before the drugstore was ever built. They cost you nothing but the bending over to pick them. You don't need a greenhouse or a special seed catalog or a single dollar to grow them on account of they grow themselves, faithful as the sunrise, in the cracks of the walk and along the fence line and in the corner of the yard. The mower never quite reaches. Now, I expect some of you are already wondering why, if these plants are so useful, nobody ever sat you down and taught you. And I want to be careful here because there's a loud kind of talk going around that says somebody is hiding all this from you on purpose, that there's a scheme to keep you sick and ignorant, and I'll have none of that because it simply isn't true and it isn't even necessary to explain what happened. The real reason is far plainer and a good deal sadder than any plot. The thing is, a weed in your yard cannot be bottled and sold with a label and a patent, so there has never been a single soul with a reason to spend money teaching you to use it. Nobody had to coordinate anything. It happened one quiet kitchen at a time when a young mother found it was easier to buy the little bottle than to go pick and dry the leaf the way her own mother had, and so she did, and her daughter watched her buy it and never learned the picking at all. Multiply that by 3 generations and a few 100 million busy households, and the knowing just thins out and fades. Not stolen, only set down and never picked back up. That is the whole of it. No villain, only forgetting. And the lovely part, the part that brings me to my own kitchen table to talk to you today, is that forgetting can be undone. The plants never went anywhere. They've been keeping their place and holding their medicine all along, patient as can be, waiting on somebody to remember their names. Folks call me Granny Pearl, and I learned everything I'm about to tell you the slow way, sitting at my own grandmother's elbow, up a holler, where the nearest doctor was the better part of a day's travel by wagon. When somebody took a fever in the night, or a young'un came running in with a handful of nettle, or a tooth gone bad, there was no calling anybody. There was only the kitchen and the garden, and the knowing that had come down to her from her mother, and from her mother before that. She'd send me out with a basket and tell me exactly which leaf to look for and which to leave be. And she'd talk the whole time she worked, the way I'm talking to you now, so that the knowing would have somewhere to land. I am an old woman myself these days, and I've come to understand that the only thing worse than forgetting all this would be keeping it to myself. So pull your chair in close, because I mean to hand it to you the same way it was handed to me. Now, I am no chemist, and my granny surely never used a word like compound in her life, but the old remedies were never magic, and I think it does you good to understand the plain reason a weed can carry medicine at all. When a plant has to stand its whole life in one spot and cannot run from a beetle or a drought or a hard freeze, it learns to make strong stuff inside its own leaves and roots to protect itself. And a good deal of that strong stuff happens to do something useful in a human body, too. Take the bitter taste you get from a dandelion green, the kind that makes you pull a face. That bitterness is the plant's own defense, and when it touches your tongue, it sends a little signal down to wake up your stomach and your digestion, which is the very reason the old folks took bitters in the spring to get themselves moving again after a winter of heavy food. Then there's a slippery, slick quality you'll feel if you chew a plantain leaf or a bit of mullein, almost like the inside of okra, and that slick is what the herb folk call mucilage, which is just a soothing plant gel that coats and calms whatever it touches, a sore throat or an angry patch of skin. Some leaves carry a substance called allantoin, the same gentle thing they put in fancy skin creams today, and it helps the skin knit itself back together a little quicker. And the roots of these plants reach deep, far deeper than your lettuce ever will, and they haul up minerals like iron and calcium and potassium from down in the subsoil, which is why a mess of cooked weeds can feed you better than half of what's in the produce aisle. There's even a kind of fiber in dandelion and burdock root called inulin that quietly feeds the good little creatures living in your gut. None of that is mystery, and none of it is invented. It is simply the ordinary chemistry of a plant doing its best to survive, and the old folks figured out how to borrow it long before anyone could name a molecule. What I want you to understand before we go a step further is that none of this is a notion I dreamed up. Every bit of it is remembered, written down in places you can go and read for yourself, and the records run back further than you'd ever guess. There's an old Anglo-Saxon manuscript called the Lacnunga, written down better than 1,000 years ago, and tucked inside it is a thing called the Nine Herbs Charm, where the healers of that rough old time named the plants they trusted most, and right there among them is the one they called waybread, which is the very plantain you've been pulling up by your front walk. Cross the water and come closer to home, and you'll find the Pennsylvania Dutch families who settled these hills, gathering young greens out of the yard every spring as a matter of course, dandelion and the rest, eaten on purpose to clean the winter out of a body. The Cherokee and other native peoples knew these plants intimately, and there's a lovely bit of history in plantain's old nickname, white man's foot. because the native folk noticed it sprang up wherever the European settlers walked, having traveled over in the seed and the boot mud, and so they named it for the strangers it followed. Go back to the ancient world and you find the herb yarrow, carrying the formal name Achillea, given for the warrior Achilles, because the soldiers of the old battlefields packed its leaves into their wounds to slow the bleeding, and they kept calling it woundwort and soldier's herb for centuries after. The monks kept physic gardens behind their monastery walls and wrote careful books about every plant in them, and an Englishman named Nicholas Culpeper put out a famous herbal back in 1653 that described most of the very weeds we'll talk about today. Plain as you please. So when I show you how to use these plants, understand that I am not teaching you something new. I am only helping you remember something very, very old. I told you earlier that this knowledge faded the gentle way, one kitchen at a time. And I want to fill in how that actually happened, because once you see the shape of it, you'll notice the same shape behind nearly everything our grandmothers knew. For most of human history, a family had no choice but to doctor itself, because help was too far and money was too scarce. So the knowing was kept close and used constantly and taught to every child out of plain necessity. Then the country changed. Folks left the land and moved into town for work, and you cannot gather burdock root off a paved street, so the gathering stopped. The roads got better, and the doctor finally came within reach, which was a mercy and a good thing, and I'll never say otherwise, but it meant a body could lean on the doctor instead of the garden. And the bottled remedies arrived on the store shelf, cheap and easy, already made, no picking and no drying and no mess. So a tired mother reached for those instead, the way any of us would. None of it was wrong exactly. It was just convenient. And convenience has a way of quietly carrying off whatever it replaces. I've shown you this same pattern before, if you've been with me a while. It's the very thing that happened to the old healing salve I taught you to render down, and to the spring tonic our people drank every March, and to the simple cough syrup that used to live in every cupboard. Each one got swapped for a bottle, and within 2 or 3 generations, the children of that house couldn't have told you the plant if it grew in their own flower bed. That's all that happened here. Now let me start handing the plants back to you, beginning with the 3 you're most likely to find before you reach the end of your own driveway. The first one you already know on sight, because the dandelion bay is the very flower children blow the seeds off of, with its jagged leaves that earned it its name, since dandelion comes from the French dent de lion, the tooth of the lion, for the row of points along each leaf. You'll know you've got the true plant by the single hollow stem with the milky white sap and the one bright yellow bloom that turns to a puffball, and every part of it is friendly to eat. The old folks gathered the young leaves in early spring before the plant flowered, while they're at their mildest, and ate them as a bitter green to wake the body after winter, and they dug the root in the fall, scrubbed it, roasted it dark in the oven, and ground it into a coffee that got many a mountain family through the lean years when real coffee was dear. To use it the simple way, pick a handful of the young leaves, rinse them well, and either toss them into a salad or pour hot water over them for a homely, bitter tea. The second is plantain. And I don't mean the banana. I mean the humble green rosette that grows flat against the ground all over your lawn, with broad oval leaves that have strong ribs running the length of them like little cords you can feel with your thumbnail. There's a narrow leaf cousin, too, with the same ribs, and both are the same medicine. This is the leaf the old folks called the drawing leaf, and reach for the moment somebody caught a bee sting, a mosquito bite, a splinter, or a scrape. And the way my granny did it was the plainest thing in the world. She'd pick a clean leaf, chew it a moment to bruise it and bring the juices out. What the old folks frankly called a spit poultice, and press that green mash right onto the angry spot to draw out the heat and soothe it. You can crush it with clean fingers if chewing it isn't to your liking. The third is chickweed, a low, sprawling little plant with tiny white star-shaped flowers and tender succulent stems that form a soft mat in the cool, damp corners of the yard in spring and fall. Here's the sure way to know it. Run your fingers along the stem and you'll feel a single line of fine hairs running down just one side, which no look-alike does, and that little detail tells you you've got the right one. It is cool and moist by nature, and the old folks used it on hot, itchy, irritated skin, worked it into soothing salves, and ate it raw as one of the mildest, pleasantest greens there is. Gather it in the cool months, eat a handful fresh in a sandwich, or save it for the salve. I'll tell you how to make further on. Now, the next one bites, so mind your hands. The stinging nettle grows tall on a square stem with toothed pointed leaves, and it's covered in fine hairs that sting like fire if you brush them bare-skinned, which is exactly why most folks give it a wide berth and a curse. But the old folks knew its secret, which is that the moment you cook it or dry it, every bit of that sting vanishes, and what's left is one of the most nourishing greens that grows. The mountain people and the Romans before them, and folk all the way back in the Bronze Age who even wove cloth from its fibers, all leaned on this plant, and they gathered the tender young tops in early spring with a glove on, then cooked them down like spinach or dried them for a mineral-rich tea. It is full of iron and calcium and was the old reliable spring tonic for anyone run down and pale, and many folk have long sipped the dried leaf tea through allergy season for comfort when the pollen flies. Wear your gloves to pick it, and let the heat take the sting before it ever touches your tongue. The next is yarrow, um, that woundwort the old soldiers carried, and you'll know it by its soft, feathery leaves that look almost like a fern, and its flat-topped clusters of small white flowers standing on a stiff stem in summer with a clean, herby smell when you rub it. This is the one the old folks pressed onto a small cut to help slow the bleeding, and brewed as a warming tea of the leaf and flower to help a body sweat through a common fever, the way mountain people always tried to do. Gather the flowering tops in summer. I will tell you plainly, though, that yarrow is one to leave alone if you're expecting a baby, and to skip if you're one of those who reacts to ragweed in the daisy family, because it's a cousin to those and can stir the same trouble. The third is mullein, and this one you cannot miss once you know it, because in its first year, it makes a big rosette of pale, soft leaves so fuzzy, the old folks called it old man's flannel, and even used it to line their shoes for warmth. And in its second year, it shoots up a tall spike covered in yellow flowers. They dipped that dried stalk in tallow and burned it as a torch in the old days, which is how it got the name Hag's Taper. Mullein was the great chest and cough plant of the mountains, and the old way was to steep the dried leaf into a tea, strained very carefully through a clean cloth to catch every one of those tiny itchy hairs, sipped warm to ease a rough cough, while the flowers were steeped in oil as a long-trusted folk comfort for an aching ear. Gather the soft leaves the first year, and the flowers the second summer, and never skip the straining. The first of the last three is that aggravating sticky vine. I'd wager you've already cursed this season, the cockleavers. Also called sticky willy or goosegrass, with its narrow leaves growing in little whorls like spokes around a wheel, and its whole body covered in tiny hooks that cling to your sleeve and your dog and anything else that passes. The old folks counted it among the spring cleansing herbs and took it as a gentle tea to freshen the system after winter. And the trick they knew was to never boil it hard, but to steep the fresh young plant in cool water overnight, what's called a cold infusion, because heat spoils its better qualities. Its close kin, the bedstraw, was even used to curdle milk into cheese in the old country. Gather the young growth in spring and let it sit in a jar of cool water overnight for a mild green drink. Then comes burdock, the big, bold plant with leaves like an elephant's ear in its first year, and in its second year, the round, prickly burrs that stick to everything, which I'll mention is the very plant that gave a Swiss engineer back in the 1940s his idea for the hook and loop fastener we all use today, after he pulled the burrs off his trousers and his dog and looked close at how they grabbed. It's the root we want dug in the fall of the first year, and folk on both sides of the ocean prized it as a spring tonic and a cleansing herb for the skin, eaten as a food too, the way the Japanese still serve it as gobo and brewed in Old Britain into the dandelion and burdock drink that's still sold to this day. Scrub the root well and simmer it gentle. I'll caution you firmly on this one. The young rosette can be confused with a couple of plants you truly do not want, so dig burdock root only when you are dead certain, ideally with an experienced forager or a good guidebook at your side. The last of the 9 is the prettiest, the wild violet elm, with its small heart-shaped leaves and its 5-petaled purple bloom that scatters across so many lawns in early spring. Both the leaf and the flower are friendly and gentle, full of that soothing mucilage I told you about, cooling and softening by nature, and the old folks made a simple syrup of the flowers and a tea of the leaves as a long-loved comfort for a dry, tickly throat and a nagging cough. The ancient Greeks so loved the violet they made it the flower of Athens, and Napoleon kept it as his own emblem centuries later. Gather the leaves and blooms in spring, and do be sure you've got the true heart-leaved violet with its unmistakable flower before you pick. Now, knowing the 9 plants is the better part of the battle, but there are a few old habits that make all of them work harder for you, and they're worth more than any single leaf. The first and most important is gathering clean, because a medicine plant is only as good as the ground it grew in. Never pick along a busy roadside where the exhaust settles, nor from a lawn that's been sprayed with weed killer or chemical feed, nor from the strip where the dog goes, and steer clear of low spots where runoff pools, since that's where everything washes down to. Find yourself a clean, untreated patch you know well, and that's your pharmacy. The second habit is drying for the winter shelf, because most of these plants vanish under the snow, and a wise woman puts up in summer what she'll want in January. The old way couldn't be simpler. Spread your clean leaves loose on a screen or slip them into a paper sack. Set them somewhere dry and airy and out of the direct sun. Give them a week or so until they crackle. Then store them in a clean glass jar with the name and the date wrote plain on the lid, on account of every dried herb looks alike by Christmas. And the third is 2 easy old preparations that stretch a plant a long way. For the skin herbs like chickweed and plantain, you cover the dried plant in a good oil, set the jar in a warm spot for a couple of weeks, then strain it off. And you've got a soothing infused oil that keeps for months and goes straight on to rough or irritated skin. For the mineral greens like nettle and dandelion, you steep the dried herb in plain vinegar for a few weeks and strain it. And that vinegar pulls the minerals right out of the leaf into a tangy splash you can pour over your cooked greens or your beans. Little habits, all of them, but they're the difference between knowing about these plants and actually living with them the way our grandmothers did. Now I have to talk to you the way my own granny talked to me when I got too sure of myself, because loving the old ways does not mean being foolish about them, and I'd be doing you wrong if I sent you off without this. Everything I've shared today belongs to the world of gentle, everyday comfort and good, plain nourishment, the easing of small complaints and the feeding of a rundown body. And that is exactly where it should stay in your mind. These plants are not a cure for any serious illness, and not one of them is meant to take the place of your doctor or the medicine he's prescribed you. If you are carrying a child or nursing one, if you're taking regular medication of any kind, or if you're thinking of these for a little one, you check with a doctor or pharmacist first every time with no exceptions, because some of these plants, the yarrow especially, are not for everyone. And knowing your plant for certain is the whole game, since a wrong identification can turn a remedy into a real danger. So when there is any doubt at all in your mind, you do not pick it. Above all, if something in your body lingers or worsens or frightens you in the night, you go and see a real doctor, and you go promptly, because the old wisdom and the new medicine were always meant to walk side by side, and the smartest mountain woman I ever knew used both. So here is what I'd love for you to do this week, and it's a small thing. The next time you're out in the yard with your gloves on, leave one patch standing. Pick just one of these 9 that grows where you live. And before you ever make a thing with it, go and learn it down to the ground, the leaf and the stem and the lookalikes, until you could find it blindfolded. Because one plant truly known is worth 100 half remembered. That's how the knowing comes back, one plant at a time, the same way it left, and I'd dearly love to hear from you down in the comments. So tell me this: what did your own grandmother keep by the kitchen door or the stove? What was the one plant or jar or remedy your family swore by? Because I read every single one of those. And between all of us, we're stitching the whole quilt back together. If this sat right with you, stay on with me, because next time I'm going to show you the backyard salve that handles a whole shelf full of little hurts from a single jar, and I don't want you to miss it. You came here today thinking you had a yard full of weeds to fight. I hope you're leaving knowing you've got a yard full of old friends instead, the same ones that kept our people well for longer than anybody can rightly remember. It was never lost, none of it. It was only waiting on you, and now it's yours again. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you next time.